If you're on social media and you're scrolling and you don't even know why you're scrolling, like you don't even know what you're looking for, your dopamine system has been tapped out.
Andrew Huberman knows a secret that only 1% of the billions of people in the world know. And the key to it is dopamine.
As much as one can get bright, natural, and if not natural, artificial light in your eyes early in the day, this sets in motion a huge number of different neurobiological and hormonal cascades that are good for you, reduces stress late at night, offsets cortisol, a million different things, really. Well, a lot of people say, okay, do I need to get into an ice bath? No, you need to get uncomfortably cold for 11 minutes a week.
The American neurosurgeon suggests that by exposing ourselves to light, whether natural or artificial, early in the day, we can unlock our full potential. In the video, he shares some small but crucial tips to help us improve ourselves. What other secrets is he going to reveal?
But now it seems everybody, including the elderly, understand that you need a combination of cardiovascular exercise and you need resistance training. I suggest people avoid layering dopamine. You know, you have one dopamine system that fortunately can be activated by a lot of different things. So for instance, I love the feeling of being completely rested, going into the gym or going for a run mid-morning after a cup of coffee, hydrating well, using the bathroom, listening to my favorite music on a sunny day. But that's a lot of things layering in for dopamine. And what happens is that if that becomes your hope and expectation, fine. But if that becomes your requirement for actually having a great run or workout, you're in trouble, because the next time it's not going to be that exciting and you're not going to be that motivated. You actually won't perform as well. Unlike email or reading an article online, social media is, you can scroll through 1,000 different or 100 different contexts within 5 minutes. And that's a big override for the brain. And then the rest of the world seems kind of boring. I know many people are curious as to whether or not caffeine can improve focus and concentration. And indeed, it can.
Engaging in cardiovascular exercise and resistance training are natural ways to increase your dopamine levels without relying on social media or mindlessly scrolling through your phone. There are many other natural and other healthier ways to boost your dopamine and live a fulfilling life. However, there is a potential danger that could cause you to waste a tremendous amount of time and negatively impact your brain chemistry. And that's not even the tip of the iceberg.
There is an immense amount of data supporting the idea that caffeine, provided it's consumed in the appropriate dosages, can improve mental performance and physical performance, and it largely does that through improvements in focus and concentration.
Regardless of what you've heard against it, there are many scientific facts that support Huberman's thesis about caffeine. There are also plenty of myths that the famous neurosurgeon can debunk today.
Caffeine also have other additional benefits. In particular, the caffeine in yerba mate and coffee and other sources of caffeine are known to increase the density and efficacy, that is the number and the function of dopamine receptors. And this has been shown in humans several times. So by ingesting caffeine pretty regularly, you're actually increasing the ability of dopamine to have this effect of increasing motivation and drive. I tend to ingest caffeine only early in the day. I tend to cut off my caffeine intake somewhere around 1 or 2 p.m. to ensure that I can get into a good night's sleep. But I realize that there are people out there that ingest caffeine as late as 2 or 3 in the afternoon and can still sleep fine. I will caution those of you that think that you can drink caffeine in the evening or nighttime and still fall asleep. All of the research points to the fact that the architecture of your sleep and the depth of your sleep is disrupted. Even if you're able to fall and stay asleep, the sleep you're getting is simply not as good as the sleep you would get if you were to shut off your caffeine intake at least 8 hours before bedtime, and ideally more like 10 or even 12 hours before bedtime. So I think that, 10 years ago or 5 years ago or even 2 years ago, I used to think, okay, what's the workout split? Or how am I going to eat for the next couple of months? What am I trying to optimize for? Is it muscle? Is it fat loss? Is it just maintaining? Is it energy? Is it focus? That's all fine and good, but sleep, nutrients, exercise, light, relationships, those really establish the foundation of what I consider to be all of the elements that create our ability to move as seamlessly as possible between the states that we happen to be in and the states we desire to be in. 11 minutes a week, divided up into a couple sessions of 2 to 3 minutes of deliberate cold exposure, increases the density of brown fat in adults and allows them to feel more comfortable in cold temperatures when they're just walking around, okay? But also when they put themselves into this deliberate cold, and I'll talk about how cold in a moment, that then they achieve much bigger increases in core resting metabolism, improvements in blood lipid and insulin management profiles. And there's some other positive effects like improved mental resilience. So a lot of positive effects. It is not important how you get cold. You could even put ice packs on your neck or in your whatever, in your pants.
Just get cold.
People do that.
Uncomfortable.
You get uncomfortably cold. How cold depends. And people always say, I want to give me a number. Well, what's uncomfortable to you is not going to be uncomfortable to me and vice versa. So uncomfortably cold. And then the key thing is that it needs to be safe, right? I mean, you're not going to jump into 30-degree Fahrenheit water. Your heart will stop, right? So you're going to try and get into chilly water that you want to get out, but you can calm yourself and stay in for that period of 2 to 3 minutes. These days, I have this obsession with trying to do one cognitively hard thing a day, and one physically hard thing a day. Now, not extreme physical, not David Goggins level workouts or anything, but I try and get my brain into kind of a linear mode. I try and narrow that aperture. Because if I don't, the distraction that's created by social media and interactions with others can kind of wick out into the rest of the day. So I'm not necessarily trying to finish something in that time, but I try and do something challenging. If I was well structured in the early part of the day, it's that 2 or 3 p.m. The key is then to try and get something really useful done cognitively again. So some people might look at this and say, wait, you're working for an hour in the morning and 30 minutes here and an hour in the afternoon. When are you actually working? But it's really about the depth of the trench when you're working. And so if I'm going to drop into something again for a few hours in the afternoon, I'm really going to drop into it. And that's typically phone off and out of the room. And my goal is to get to the evening time so that I can do the things that I want. It's like how to get more focused. Okay, so we can talk about, what do you take? What's the supplement? But you have to say, well, how are you sleeping? Have you done any exercise? You really always find yourself, or I find myself, taking 10 steps back and then moving through the sequence of 5 things before you can even begin to talk about whether or not taking 300 or 600 milligrams of alpha GPC and how often to do that and does it work and yes, it works, etc. But those things really set the foundation. And so I like to think of those 5 things every single day. You have to re-up on sleep every 24 hours or try to. You have to re-up on movement every 24 hours. You can go a day or so immobile, but you better move the next day, right? Mm-hmm. And ideally you're moving 7 days a week. You need nutrients, even if they come from stored sources, even if you're going to fast. You're going to fast for a day or 2? Okay, fine. I've done that. I know you've done that. I would put hydration under nutrients too. Mm-hmm. So you can derive nutrients from stored fat, protein, etc., glycogen. You're going to need that every 24 hours. You're going to need sunlight, even if through cloud cover. And you're going to want to avoid bright artificial lights at night. Not every night, but most nights of your life. And then that relationships one is the one that maybe we can go into in a little bit more depth at some point, but it requires focus. It requires attention every 24 hours. Testosterone has some very interesting effects on the brain. The major mental effect of testosterone is it makes effort feel good. And the reason it does it is that the amygdala, this fear center in the brain, this anxiety center in the brain, has androgen receptors. It has testosterone receptors. And so the way this works in animals and in humans as well is that for most species, the males of that species never get a chance to mate. But if you think about animals with antlers, like rams, there's been a lot of research, believe it or not, on rams. They have to fight for the right to mate.
Yes.
And the fighting is a choice, right? And the decision to walk away is a choice usually. They usually don't kill each other, although I know some of the injuries can lead to death. So testosterone, these surges in testosterone that happen seasonally in certain species like rams or even these little hamsters, the males will rip each other's testicles off in order to fight for the right to mate. So males of a given species have to actually overcome the fear of pain and punishment. And the surge in testosterone is what causes the shift to the willingness to engage in battle. And so when humans are taking low doses or reasonable doses of testosterone, or they're increasing their testosterone, or they're going through puberty, effort and leaning into pain and challenge actually has the effect of making the body feel soothed and good. It's a drive, just like sex is a drive or drinking water when you're thirsty is a drive. What's really interesting about hypnosis is that it increases areas of the brain that are responsible for deep relaxation, focus, and self-awareness, this interoception, simultaneously.
Andrew Huberman knows the secret that only 1% of the billions of people in the world know. In the video, he shares some small but crucial tips to help us improve ourselves.
It's essentially opening up pathways that allow you to change your brain in the ways that you want.
There are many other natural and other healthier ways to live a fulfilling life, and that's not even the tip of the iceberg.
For me, I tend to wake up sometime around 6 a.m., 6:30, sometimes as late as 7 a.m. The first thing I do after I wake up is I take the pen that's on my nightstand and the pad of paper on my nightstand, and I write down the time in which I woke up. I put my phone on airplane mode about an hour before I go to sleep, and then I set my alarm typically for 6:30 a.m., and some days the alarm wakes me up, other days I wake up before the alarm. And yes, some days the alarm goes off and I hit snooze a few times, and then usually by 7 a.m. I am up and out of bed. The reason for writing down what time I wake up is because I want to know that average wake-up time. That average wake-up time informs what's called my temperature minimum. It tells me when my body temperature was lowest. The temperature minimum is the time in each 24-hour cycle that your body temperature is lowest. I know that the lowest temperature that my body will be at across the 24-hour cycle tends to be 2 hours before my typical wake-up time. I don't care what my actual temperature is. I care when my lowest temperature is. So I highly recommend that you write down when you wake up or track that in some way that works for you, and use that as a reference point to determine your temperature minimum. You can leverage the temperature minimum for several things. Shifting your clock, shifting your circadian sleep schedule and wake schedule. Also for shifting your eating schedule, etc. But even if you don't travel, even if you don't care about things like jet lag, even if you sleep fabulously all year round, never have a poor night's sleep, knowing your temperature minimum, that time when your temperature is at its lowest point, is a valuable thing to know. For humans and for animals, there's a phenomenon whereby when we generate our own forward motion, forward ambulation, visual images pass by us on our eyes, so-called optic flow. And for those of you that are low vision or no vision, the same phenomenon occurs in the auditory system. Sounds pass by us in so-called auditory flow. Getting into a mode of forward ambulation and especially experiencing visual flow has a powerful effect on the nervous system. The effect it has is essentially to quiet or reduce the amount of neural activity in this brain structure called the amygdala. Amygdala means almond, and many of you have probably heard about the amygdala for its role in anxiety and fear and threat detection. And indeed, the amygdala is part of the network in the brain that generates feelings of fear and threat and anxiety. It does a bunch of other things too, but that's one of its primary functions. Forward ambulation, walking or biking or running, and generating optic flow in particular, has this incredible property of lowering activity in the amygdala and thereby reducing levels of anxiety. So for me, this process of taking a walk each morning isn't about exercise. It's not about burning calories. It's not about any of that. It's really about getting into optic flow and reducing the levels of amygdala activation. I'm a big believer, based on quality peer-reviewed data, that hydration is essential for mental performance. As many of you know, neurons require ionic flow. What that means is neurons need sodium, they need magnesium, and they need potassium in order to function. We do tend to get dehydrated at night. Even if the day is not very hot, I try and top off, or I try and make sure that I'm hydrated early in the day before I begin any work. I purposely delay my caffeine intake to 90 minutes to 120 minutes after I wake up. The reason I delay caffeine is because one of the factors that induces a sense of sleepiness is the buildup of adenosine in our system. The buildup of adenosine accumulates the longer we are awake. So when I wake up in the morning, when you wake up in the morning, your adenosine levels are likely to be very low. However, caffeine is an adenosine blocker. It's actually a competitive antagonist for you aficionados. It sort of parks in the receptor that adenosine normally would park at and prevents adenosine from acting on that receptor. That's why you feel more alert, because it's essentially blocking the effect of this sleepiness factor that we all create called adenosine. The reason for delaying caffeine intake 90 minutes to 2 hours after waking is I want to make sure that I don't have a late afternoon or even early afternoon crash from caffeine. A lower level of adenosine is able to create a greater level of sleepiness. It took me years to figure this out. I used to wake up and I'd think, I don't want to drink caffeine too close to bedtime, so I'm going to start drinking my caffeine really early. I let my cortisol naturally come up in the morning. I avoid drinking caffeine until about 90 minutes or 2 hours after waking. And when I do that, I find that I don't experience the afternoon crash. Delaying caffeine to 90 minutes to 2 hours optimizes this relationship between adenosine and wakefulness and sleepiness in a way that really provides a nice, consistent arc of energy throughout the day and brings energy down as I'm headed toward sleep and falling asleep. Fasting increases levels of adrenaline, also called epinephrine, in the brain and body. And when our levels of epinephrine and adrenaline are increased, we learn better, we can focus better. There's terrific data supporting that. You don't want epinephrine, aka adrenaline, too high. That feels like stress and panic. You get jittery, you can't focus. But in its optimal range, adrenaline really provides a heightened sense of focus and the ability to encode, meaning bring in, and retain, remember information. Many people ask, in fact, there's a whole community and discussion boards, etc., and YouTube comments on the internet about what breaks a fast and what doesn't. The fact of the matter is that's going to be highly individual because it's going to depend on how sensitive your blood sugar is. And more accurately, it's going to depend on things like your insulin sensitivity. So, for instance, if you're somebody who gets up in the morning, hydrates, and goes out for a 6-mile run, you could probably eat a jar of almond butter and still be what's called fat fasted. Your insulin levels will still be very low because even though that is a large volume of almond butter, even to me, that large number of calories come from a source that doesn't increase blood sugar very much and insulin very much. So you get the idea. It's going to depend on your recent eating history, your blood sugar history, your glycogen stores, etc. So if anyone tells you that breaks a fast or that doesn't, that's kind of silly. Would 1 grain of sugar break your fast? No. Would an entire tablespoon of sugar break your fast? Yes. You'll get a big blip in blood sugar and insulin from that. However, how long that lasts, how long it breaks your fast will depend on how glycogen depleted you are and a number of other factors. When our eyes are directed upward, literally when our eyelids are open, no surprise there, and when our eyes are directed upward, it creates a state of heightened alertness. And this has a relationship to the brainstem neurons that create alertness and their control over the muscles of the eye and, believe it or not, the eyelids. Now, it's not the case that if you are absolutely exhausted and you need to feel more alert, that looking upward is going to make you feel wide awake, although it will help support your levels of alertness. The point here is that you can optimize your workstation in a physical way that leverages this aspect of the visual system and your level of alertness. Since most of us want to be awake while we're working, try and position your screen or your tablet, whatever device you happen to be working on, at least at eye level and ideally slightly higher. If you think about it, most people are not doing this. Most people are looking down at their computer or tablet or are angling their eyes at their screen at about 30 degrees. That is not going to support heightened states of alertness and optimal attention. In fact, the opposite relationship between eye position and alertness is also true. When we look down, when our eyelids are slightly closed, it tends to decrease our levels of alertness and increase our levels of sleepiness. Non-sleep deep rest, or NSDR, is an acronym that I coined as an umbrella term to encompass many protocols that all have been shown in one form or another to support better brain and body function. Now, these protocols have names that you've heard before, things like meditation, things like yoga nidra, and things like hypnosis. All of these protocols and these activities, however, share something in common, which is they involve a deliberate and directed shift in one's state, and the shift tends to be toward a state of deeper relaxation. There is ample literature, there is robust and ample literature supporting the fact that a regular meditation practice is beneficial. But meditation itself has many forms: transcendental meditation, loving kindness meditation. But there's one NSDR type protocol that has been shown by the greatest number of scientific studies to promote not just states of deep relaxation, not just states of heightened focus, but also to accelerate plasticity and learning within the brain. And that's hypnosis. And I've become increasingly excited and interested in hypnosis as a tool, and not just a tool of any kind, but a tool that really can be directed toward particular goals and outcomes. And I think that's really what sets hypnosis apart as an NSDR, non-sleep deep rest protocol, from things like naps or things like yoga nidra or things like meditation. And I certainly believe and understand that meditation, naps, and yoga nidra can be directed toward less anxiety, etc. But hypnosis is unique in that it's very directed. The essence of hypnosis is for the person, you, to guide your brain toward a particular outcome or change. Specific areas of our brain that are involved in executive function, which is associated with our ability to focus, as well as what's called the default mode network, which is sort of the way that your brain idles. Does your brain tend to idle at a level of high anxiety or calm, as well as activation of a brain area called the insula. Hypnosis has been shown to activate the insula, which can enhance our sense of interoception, our sense of internal state, which might sound like an annoying thing. You don't want to be thinking about your heartbeat or your breathing. But what's really interesting about hypnosis is that it increases areas of the brain that are responsible for deep relaxation, focus, and self-awareness, this interoception, simultaneously. So I've made it a practice, a daily practice, in fact, that after lunch and after this walk, I do a brief 10-minute hypnosis script. Because of what I found is that in contrast to naps and in contrast to other forms of NSDR, it really allows me to enter a state of deep relaxation, but also to then exit that state in a very focused and deliberate way that allows me to lean into my afternoon in an alert way, and in a way that I can function and do mental work and interact with people, etc. And I want to emphasize that the hypnosis that I'm referring to here is not stage hypnosis. This isn't you being programmed to squawk like a chicken or do anything against your will. This is you teaching your brain how to access these focused, relaxed, interoceptive states.